The Zeta Sector Research Station was a quiet, hidden place floating in deep space. The United Galactic Council built it to study the mysteries of the universe. Every day, the alien crew worked on new discoveries, hoping to understand life better. But on this day, the crew wasn't studying or experimenting. They were fighting for their lives. Captain Jarek, a tall, slender alien with blue skin and glowing eyes, led the research station. He was from the Ilakian race, a peaceful species that valued knowledge and kindness. Captain Jarek had always believed in peaceful solutions. He thought all beings could live together without war. But now he was starting to doubt his own beliefs. A deadly enemy, known as the Xalir, was attacking the station. The Xalir were a cruel, aggressive race that took what they wanted by force. They were strong, with hard gray scales covering their bodies and sharp claws on their hands. They weren't interested in talking or making peace. They only wanted power and control, and they would destroy anything in their way. Captain Jarek watched the station's monitors in the command room. His crew was in danger. The Xalir ships circled the station, firing blasts that shook the walls. Every time the station's defenses blocked an attack, another wave would follow. The Xalir were relentless. "Captain Jarek, we can't hold them back much longer," said Rena, the station's chief engineer, who was a small feathered alien with large, anxious eyes. She looked at Captain Jarek, her voice trembling. "Our shields are dropping. We have no way to escape." Jarek clenched his fists. He had led this station for years and had never faced a threat like this. All the Council's technology, all their peaceful diplomacy, meant nothing against the Xalir. He thought of his crew, who trusted him to protect them. He needed a plan. Fast. "Captain, maybe there's one option left," said his communication officer, Ne Young. She was a human from Earth, the only one on the station. She was skilled and brave, but even she looked frightened. Jarek looked at her, confused. "What option, Ne Young?" "A Deathworlder," Ne Young said, her voice steady but serious. "A human from Earth, like me. Earth is considered a death world because it's dangerous. Its people are strong and can survive things most species cannot. There is one human stationed nearby. His name is Kim Ji-ho. He's a combat specialist." The room went silent. Many aliens in the room had heard of humans. They knew Earth was a wild, dangerous place with intense storms, harsh animals, and difficult environments. Its people were seen as unpredictable and resilient, but no one had ever thought of bringing one here. Jarek looked hesitant. "A Deathworlder. Will he help us? Our people are different from humans. I'm not sure he'll want to fight for us." Ne Young nodded. "I know humans can be unpredictable, but I've heard of Ji-ho. He's brave, and he's our best chance. He's used to difficult battles. If anyone can help, it's him." Captain Jarek thought for a moment. The Xalir ships were closing in, and the station's shields were nearly gone. His crew couldn't hold out much longer. He knew he had no choice. "All right, Ne Young," he said, his voice firm. "Send a message to Kim Ji-ho. Tell him we need his help. Tell him we're desperate." Ne Young immediately turned to her console and sent out a distress signal to Ji-ho. She explained the situation, the threat, and the dire need for help. Then they waited. Every second felt like an eternity as the Xalir ships drew closer. Minutes passed, and finally, a response came through. Ji-ho's voice crackled over the speakers, calm but strong. "This is Kim Ji-ho. I received your call," he said. "If you're sure you want a human to help, I'm on my way. But be warned, once I arrive, things won't be the same." Captain Jarek felt a wave of relief, mixed with fear. Ji-ho was coming. A Deathworlder, a human, was their last hope. Kim Ji-ho's ship cut through the darkness of space, moving quickly toward the research station. The station, surrounded by Xalir ships, looked small and fragile. Ji-ho narrowed his eyes as he saw the state of things. He'd faced tough situations before, but this was serious. On the station, Captain Jarek watched Jai-Ho's ship approach. The human ship was different from their own. It was built for speed and strength, not for peaceful research. The sight of it made Jarek feel a mixture of hope and fear. He'd never met a Deathworlder before, and he didn't know what to expect. Na Young, standing beside Captain Jarek in the command room, felt her heart racing. She had heard of Kim Ji-ho from other humans, stories of his bravery and skill in combat, but she also knew he had a reputation for being tough, sometimes even reckless. Humans from Earth were known for being survivors, people who did whatever it took to live. Ji-ho was no different. Prepare to dock. Jai-Ho's voice crackled over the station speakers. Jarek nodded, and the docking bay doors opened to let Jai-Ho's ship in. The crew watched as the human ship touched down, and a hush fell over them. They had never seen a human warrior up close, especially not one from a death world like Earth. The doors opened, and Ji-Ho stepped out. He was tall and strong, wearing a dark suit with heavy boots. His face was calm, his eyes sharp and focused. He looked around, taking in the sight of the alien crew staring at him. He could tell they were unsure, even scared of him. But he didn't mind. He was used to it. Captain Jarek and Na Young walked forward to greet him. Ji-Ho gave them a small nod, his face serious. "Thank you for coming, Jai-Ho," Jarek said, trying to keep his voice steady. We need your help. The Xalir are attacking, and we don't have the strength to fight them off." Jai-Ho looked at Jarek, then at Na Young, and finally at the rest of the crew, who were watching from a distance. He could see the worry in their eyes, the fear of what the Xalir would do if they broke through the station's defenses. "I understand," Jai-Ho said. His voice was calm, but there was a toughness in it that reassured them. "I'll do what I can, but you need to follow my orders. Fighting the Xalir isn't easy. They're strong and ruthless, and they won't hesitate to destroy anything in their path." Jarek nodded, willing to agree to anything that might save his crew. "We're ready to listen. Please, tell us what to do." Jai-Ho gave a quick nod and walked over to a control panel, where he studied the station's defense systems. He quickly saw that their weapons were limited, designed only for basic protection, not for a serious battle. "Your weapons are weak," Jai-Ho said bluntly. "But we can use what we have to make traps. We can create choke points where we can surprise the Xalir and cut them off. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Na Young watched Ji-Ho closely. She could see that he was already planning, already thinking of ways to turn the station into a battlefield that might work in their favor. She felt a sense of hope, something she hadn't felt since the Xalir began their attack. Jai-Ho turned to her. "Na Young, I'll need your help to communicate with the crew and get everyone into position. We don't have much time, so we need to act fast." Na Young nodded, grateful to be part of the plan. She quickly moved to her station, ready to follow Jai-Ho's orders. The rest of the crew, though still unsure about him, began to prepare. They gathered weapons, checked their equipment, and listened closely to his instructions. Jai-Ho wasted no time. He walked through the hallways of the station, examining every corner and every entrance. He explained his plan to small groups of crew members, showing them where to hide, how to set traps, and how to stay out of sight. His instructions were simple but effective, and even the most skeptical aliens began to feel a bit more confident. "Remember," Jai-Ho told them, "the Xalir are strong, but they're not invincible. They're used to fighting with force, not strategy. If we stay smart, we have a chance." The crew nodded, their eyes showing a spark of hope. They realized that maybe, just maybe, this human could do what they couldn't. Maybe this Deathworlder could save them. In the command room, Captain Jarek watched Ji-Ho in action. He felt a strange mix of admiration and fear. Ji-Ho's calmness in the face of danger was unlike anything Jarek had ever seen. It was as if he didn't even consider the possibility of failure. As Ji-Ho finished his preparations, the warning alarms began to sound. The Xaldar ships were moving closer, preparing to board. Ji-ho looked at the crew, his expression steady. "Get to your positions," he said firmly. "And remember, stay calm. We're going to fight them off." The crew hurried to follow his orders, taking up positions around the station. For the first time, they felt ready. They were no longer just scientists or engineers. With Ji-ho leading them, they were fighters. Ji-ho waited in the shadows, his back against the cold metal wall. Around him, the alien crew hid, watching him closely. They held their weapons tightly, their eyes wide with fear. The station was silent, but everyone could hear the faint rumbling of the Xaldar ships outside. The invaders were getting ready to board. Ji-ho looked at his wrist communicator. A map of the station appeared on the small screen, showing him the paths and tunnels they'd use to move around without being seen. He had placed crew members at key points, ready to ambush the Xaldar the moment they entered. Ji-ho's plan was to strike fast and confuse the enemy, making them believe the station had a bigger defense force than it really did. The Xaldar finally broke through the outer doors with a loud crash. They stormed in, their heavy, clawed feet pounding against the floors. They were tall and fierce, with gray scales and sharp eyes that scanned every corner. The Xaldar were clearly ready to crush anything in their way. Ji-ho signaled to the crew members hiding nearby. They nodded, their hands shaking slightly, but they were ready. They had never fought like this before, but Ji-ho's calm confidence had given them strength. The first Xaldar group entered a narrow corridor, unaware of what waited for them. Ji-ho held his breath, counting down in his mind. Then, at the perfect moment, he jumped out, firing his weapon. His shots were quick and precise, hitting the Xaldar attackers in weak spots. Two of the aliens fell instantly, their bodies hitting the floor with a thud. The rest of the crew quickly followed his lead. They fired their weapons, surprising the Xaldar who hadn't expected such resistance. The invaders roared in anger, trying to push forward, but Ji-ho and the crew kept them back, moving skillfully from one hiding spot to another. Na-young watched from her position at the far end of the corridor. She felt a rush of excitement and fear as she saw Ji-ho fighting. He moved with ease, as if he had done this 100 times before. His face remained calm, focused, never showing any fear or hesitation. She had never seen anyone like him. One of the Xaldar charged toward Ji-ho, its sharp claws ready to strike. Ji-ho stepped aside just in time, avoiding the attack, and countered with a quick blow that sent the alien stumbling back. He didn't give it a chance to recover, delivering another hit that knocked it to the ground. More Xaldar rushed into the corridor, but Ji-ho was ready. He signaled to the crew to pull back slightly, leading the Xaldar deeper into the station. He knew that once the Xaldar were in the narrower parts of the corridors, they would have less space to move. It would make them easier to trap. As the Xaldar followed, Ji-ho and the crew triggered small explosives they had hidden along the walls. The blasts shook the station, sending the invaders into confusion. Some of the Xaldar stumbled, others fell, and Ji-ho's crew took the chance to strike, moving in with fast, precise shots. Captain Jarek watched the battle unfold on a monitor in the command room. His heart pounded as he saw Ji-ho in action. The human's courage and skill were unlike anything he had ever witnessed. For the first time, Jarek felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Ji-ho continued to lead the fight, moving from one point to the next, guiding the crew with quick signals. He didn't speak much, but the crew had learned to read his movements. They trusted him now, knowing he wouldn't let them fall. Finally, after several minutes of intense fighting, the first wave of Xaldar attackers lay defeated. The station was quiet again, but Ji-ho knew the battle wasn't over. The Xaldar would regroup and try again. They were relentless, and they wouldn't give up so easily. Ji-ho looked at Na-young, who was breathing hard, her face a mix of relief and awe. She gave him a nod, a silent thank you for keeping them safe. "We did well," Ji-ho said, his voice calm but firm. but there are more of them out there. This was just the start. Captain Jarek's voice came over the communicator. Ji-ho, thank you. You saved us this time. But can we really hold them off? Ji-ho's eyes narrowed. As long as I'm here, we'll keep fighting. The Xalar think we're weak. We're going to prove them wrong. With that, Ji-ho led his team to prepare for the next wave, his mind already forming new plans. The Xalar were tough, but he was tougher. He was a Deathworlder, and he wasn't about to let anyone take the station. After the first wave of Xalar was defeated, Ji-ho gathered the crew in a quiet room deep within the station. They all looked tired but hopeful, a little less fearful than before. The recent victory had lifted their spirits, but they knew it wasn't over yet. The Xalar were still out there, and soon they would return, more determined and ready for a fight. Captain Jarek joined them, his face serious but grateful. He looked at Ji-ho, feeling a sense of respect for the human. Ji-ho's strength and calmness had saved them, and the crew now looked to him as their leader in this battle. Ji-ho stepped forward and looked at everyone. Good job out there, he said simply, his voice steady. But we're not done. The Xalar will come back, and this time they'll be ready for us. We need to change our strategy. Rena, the chief engineer, raised her hand, looking nervous but determined. How can we stop them? Ji-ho, they're stronger than us, and we're running low on ammunition. Ji-ho nodded, understanding her worry. We can't match them in strength or weapons, but we can outsmart them. We know this station better than they do. We'll turn it into a maze, a trap they can't escape. The crew listened closely as Ji-ho started to explain his plan. He wanted to lead the Xalar into the station's deeper tunnels, where the passages were narrow and winding. In these tight spaces, the Xalar would have trouble moving, and their numbers wouldn't matter as much. Ji-ho planned to set traps and ambush points at every turn, making the Xalar struggle with each step. Nayoung, Ji-ho said, turning to her, I'll need your help to coordinate everything. You'll keep us connected and alert everyone when it's time to strike. Nayoung nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. She was ready to do whatever was needed to help the crew survive. She quickly moved to a communication panel, her fingers flying over the buttons as she set up channels to each part of the station. Ji-ho then pointed at a large display on the wall, showing a map of the station. He pointed to several locations and explained where each crew member would be positioned. We'll set small charges here, here, and here, he said, marking spots on the map. When the Xalar come through, we'll trigger the explosions to separate their groups. It'll make them confused and easier to handle. The crew exchanged nervous glances but nodded, trusting Ji-ho's plan. They began gathering supplies, including anything that could be used as a trap or a distraction. Ji-ho's calm instructions and detailed planning gave them confidence. Captain Jarek, Ji-ho said, turning to the captain, I'll need you to monitor the Xalar's movements, use the cameras to track them, and send updates to Nayoung. This way, we'll know where they're heading, and we can lead them exactly where we want them to go. Captain Jarek agreed, feeling a strange mix of relief and respect. He had never taken orders from another before, but Ji-ho's experience and quick thinking made him the best leader for this battle. As the crew moved into position, Ji-ho made his way to a small group of young aliens who looked particularly nervous. They had volunteered to help, even though they had little experience in combat. Stay calm, Ji-ho told them, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to be the strongest. Just follow the plan, and you'll be fine. One of the young aliens, a small creature with green skin and large dark eyes, looked up at Ji-ho and nodded, clearly trying to be brave. Ji-ho gave him a quick pat on the shoulder, reassuring him before moving on. Once everyone was ready, Ji-ho took his position at the first ambush point. The silence in the tunnels felt heavy, and each crew member's breathing echoed softly in the narrow spaces. Ji-ho waited, his senses sharp, his mind focused. He knew the Xalar would come soon, and he wanted his team to be prepared for whatever happened next. Finally, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnels. The Xaldir were coming, their harsh voices and growls filling the air. Jiho held up a hand, signaling everyone to stay quiet. He could feel the tension in the air, but he trusted his plan and his team. As the first group of Xaldir entered the tunnel, Jiho triggered a small explosion, sending debris down on top of them. The invaders shouted in surprise, scattering and trying to find cover. Jiho and his team moved quickly, taking down several Xaldir before disappearing into the shadows again. The Xaldir tried to follow, but they stumbled through the dark, unfamiliar tunnels, frustrated and confused. Jiho watched them carefully, guiding his crew from one point to the next, always staying one step ahead. The Xaldir thought they were the hunters, but tonight, they were the hunted. And with Jiho leading the way, the crew was ready for whatever came next. The crew had managed to push back the Xaldir again and again. Jiho's traps and careful ambushes made the invaders struggle, forcing them to lose their usual confidence. But as the fighting continued, Jiho noticed something strange. The Xaldir attacks were becoming more organized, less rushed. It was almost as if they had figured out the layout of the station and were moving with a plan of their own. Captain Jarek's voice crackled over Jiho's communicator. Jiho, the Xaldir are grouping up near the central corridor. It seems like they're waiting for something. Jiho frowned, his mind racing. They're changing their approach. They must have realized we're trying to lead them in circles. Now, they're trying to trap us instead. Ne Young, who was positioned nearby, looked worried. What should we do, Jiho? If they're setting a trap, we could be walking right into it. Jiho quickly studied the station map on his communicator, trying to guess the Xaldir's next move. His eyes narrowed as he noticed the pattern of their positioning. It became clear. They planned to push the crew into a dead-end section of the station, where escape would be impossible. It was a smart plan, and Jiho had to admit he hadn't expected it. But he wasn't ready to give up. All right, Jiho said, looking at Ne Young and the nearby crew members. If they want us in the central corridor, we'll go, but not in the way they expect. Ne Young's eyes widened. You want us to walk into their trap? Jiho nodded, a small determined smile on his face. Yes, but we'll bring our own surprises. We're going to pretend to fall for their plan, then hit them from all sides when they think they have us. Jiho explained his idea quickly. He wanted the crew to move toward the central corridor in small groups, making it look like they were retreating. The Xaldir would believe their trap was working, but Jiho had arranged his team so they could attack from hidden side tunnels. If the Xaldir came close enough, the crew could surround them. Captain Jarek's voice came through again, sounding tense. Are you sure about this, Jiho? The Xaldir aren't used to being outsmarted, but this plan is risky. Jiho's voice was calm and steady. If we fight them directly, they'll overpower us. This way, we control the battle. Trust me, Captain. Jarek hesitated but finally agreed. All right, we'll follow your lead. With that, Jiho signaled the crew to start moving. Groups of 2 or 3 crew members quietly made their way toward the central corridor, sticking to the shadows. Each one was prepared to stay hidden until Jiho's signal. They moved quickly but carefully, knowing that any loud noise could give away the plan. As they reached the corridor, Jiho spotted the Xaldir forces waiting at the other end. There were more of them than he'd expected, maybe 30, maybe more. They stood in formation, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the area. The Xaldir believed they had finally cornered the crew. Jiho held up a hand, signaling his crew to stay still. He waited, counting the Xaldir's movements, noting their positions. They were slowly advancing, thinking they were about to finish the job. Jiho allowed them to move a little closer, close enough for his team's hidden positions to be useful. Then, with a quick nod, Jiho gave the signal. From every side, the crew sprang out of their hiding spots, firing their weapons and throwing small, makeshift explosives. The Xalir were caught completely off guard, their confidence shattered as they found themselves surrounded. Jai-Ho moved swiftly, taking down Xalir soldiers with precise shots. The crew followed his example, their fear replaced by determination. They had come this far, and with Jai-Ho leading them, they felt stronger than ever. One of the Xalir tried to rush at Nadung, its claws extended, but Jai-Ho was faster. He moved in front of her, blocking the attack with a swift strike. The Xalir staggered back, and Naeum took the chance to fire, taking it down with one shot. She gave Jai-Ho a grateful look, and he nodded, quickly moving to the next attacker. The Xalir, realizing they were losing, tried to retreat, but Jai-Ho and the crew pressed forward. Jai-Ho didn't let up, pushing them back with every step. His quick thinking had turned the trap against the Xalir, and now they were scrambling to escape. The remaining Xalir finally broke and ran, retreating back toward their ship. Jai-Ho watched them go, his breathing steady, his gaze hard. He knew they would regroup, but he also knew that he and his crew had just won a major victory. Naeum, breathing heavily, looked around at the others. She could hardly believe it. They had survived another wave, and all because of Jai-Ho's bravery and strategy. She turned to him, admiration in her eyes. Jai-Ho gave her a reassuring nod. "We're not done yet, but we're getting closer. We just have to keep outsmarting them." The crew gathered around, their faces filled with a new sense of pride. They had faced the Xalir and won, and with Jai-Ho leading them, they felt ready for whatever came next. The crew barely had time to rest before Captain Jarek received another alert. The Xalir forces were regrouping just outside the station, gathering for what seemed to be a final desperate attack. The crew's small victories had wounded their pride, and now the Xalir were determined to end this battle once and for all. Jai-Ho stood with Captain Jarek, Naeum, and Rena in the control room, studying the screen that showed the Xalir forces outside. There were more of them than before, with heavier armor and stronger weapons. It was clear they had brought everything they had left for this assault. Naeum looked worried. "Jai-Ho, they're stronger this time. We don't have many traps left, and our ammunition is running low. How can we fight them off?" Jai-Ho remained calm, his eyes focused on the screen. He knew the situation was serious, but he also knew they couldn't give up. "We'll make this place a fortress," he said, determination clear in his voice. "We'll use every remaining resource and force them to fight for every inch." Captain Jarek nodded. "Tell us what to do, Jai-Ho. We're with you." Jai-Ho quickly laid out his plan. The Xalir would expect them to defend the central corridors again, so this time he would draw them toward the outer sections of the station. These areas had narrow, winding passages that would slow the Xalir down. Jai-Ho's goal was to make the Xalir waste their strength and become disorganized. "Rena," Jai-Ho said, turning to the engineer, "we need barriers and blockades in these passages." He pointed at several points on the map. "Anything that can slow them down. We'll trap them in these tight spaces and pick them off one by one." Rena nodded, already thinking of what she could use. "We have old equipment in the storage rooms. I'll get a team to set up the blockades right away." Jai-Ho then turned to Naeum. "You'll keep everyone updated on the Xalir's movements. We need to know where they're coming from so we can move and stay ahead." Naeum gave a quick nod, already setting up communication channels to keep the crew connected. Once the preparations were complete, Jai-Ho led the crew to their positions. The air was tense, everyone waiting for the Xalir to break through. Jai-Ho could see the fear on some of the crew's faces, but he also saw determination. They had fought this far, and now they trusted him to guide them through the final battle. The silence was broken by a loud crash. The Xalir had broken through the outer doors, their heavy footsteps echoing through the halls as they advanced. Jai-Ho held up a hand, signaling everyone to stay calm and wait. As the Xalir pushed forward, they found themselves in the narrow passages where Rena's team had set up blockades. Forced to slow down, The Xalar tried to push through, but the blockades held, forcing them to break formation and squeeze through one by one. Jai-Ho and his team were waiting on the other side, hidden behind cover. The moment the first Xalar soldier entered, Jai-Ho gave the signal, and his crew opened fire. Their shots were precise, hitting the Xalar in weak spots and forcing them to fall back. The Xalar, frustrated and confused, tried to regroup, but the narrow passages made it difficult. Jai-Ho's plan was working. The Xalar couldn't move freely and were struggling to keep up their attack. Nayoung's voice came through Jai-Ho's communicator. Another group of Xalar is trying to push in from the north side. Jai-Ho responded quickly, directing part of the crew to shift positions. They moved silently, ready to ambush the new wave of attackers. Jai-Ho's calm commands kept everyone focused, giving them confidence even as the Xalar pushed harder. At one point, a large Xalar warrior managed to break through a barrier and charged at Jai-Ho with a roar. Jai-Ho stood his ground, waiting until the last second before sidestepping the attack. He hit the Xalar with a quick, powerful strike, knocking it off balance. Nayoung, who was nearby, fired a shot that sent the warrior crashing to the ground. Jai-Ho gave her a nod of thanks, then turned back to the battle. He could see the Xalar's numbers starting to thin, their once strong attack now weakening as they struggled in the maze-like passages. They had underestimated Jai-Ho and his crew, and now they were paying the price. Finally, after a long, intense fight, the last of the Xalar forces began to retreat. Jai-Ho and the crew watched as the remaining invaders fled back toward their ships, defeated and exhausted. As the dust settled, the crew slowly gathered around Jai-Ho, their faces filled with relief and disbelief. They had done it. They had defended the station against an enemy far stronger than them. Captain Jarek stepped forward, looking at Jai-Ho with deep respect. "Jai-Ho, we couldn't have done this without you. You saved us." Jai-Ho gave a humble nod, glancing around at the crew. "We did this together. You all fought hard, and because of that, we survived." Nayoung smiled, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. She knew the battle wasn't won by strength alone, but by Jai-Ho's courage and careful planning. With their final defense successful, they were ready for whatever came next. With the last of the Xalar forces retreating, the station fell into an almost eerie silence. The crew was exhausted but triumphant, and they gathered in the central corridor, where Jai-Ho and Captain Jarek stood waiting. Faces showed a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. They had truly survived the impossible. Jai-Ho looked around at the crew, feeling a deep sense of respect for each one of them. They had faced fear and danger, and now they stood victorious. He gave them a small nod, acknowledging their courage. Captain Jarek cleared his throat, his voice loud and clear in the quiet corridor. "Everyone, I just want to say how proud I am of each and every one of you. We stood together, and because of that, we won. We proved that no matter how strong the enemy is, we can fight back and win." The crew cheered, some raising their fists in the air, others hugging each other in relief. Nayoung stepped forward, her face lit with gratitude as she looked at Jai-Ho. She knew that without him, this day might have had a different ending. "Jai-Ho," she said, her voice full of admiration, "you showed us what humans are capable of. Thank you for standing with us and giving us hope." Jai-Ho smiled, a bit embarrassed by the attention. "I only did what I thought was right," he said simply. "You all fought hard, and that's why we won. Remember that." Rena, the chief engineer, looked around at the damaged station. Panels were cracked, some walls were scorched, and pieces of broken equipment lay scattered. "It's going to take a lot of work to repair everything," she said, sighing, though her tone held relief. "But I think we'll be just fine." Jai-Ho nodded in agreement. "You'll rebuild stronger than before, and if the Xalar ever come back, they'll know not to underestimate you." Captain Jarek walked up to Jai-Ho and held out his hand. Jai-Ho shook it firmly, feeling the respect and gratitude in the captain's grip. We called for help, and you came. You're welcome here anytime. Jai-Ho, you're one of us now." Jai-Ho smiled, though he knew that after everything, it was time for him to leave. "Thank you, Captain. It was an honor to fight alongside you and your crew, but I think it's time for me to head home." The crew looked sad to see him go, but they understood. Jai-Ho had given them strength when they needed it most, and now he needed to return to his own world. Na-Young stepped forward, handing him a small communication device. "If you ever need us, call. You've got friends here now." Jai-Ho accepted the device with a grateful nod, tucking it into his jacket. He looked around at the faces he had come to know and respect, feeling a strange mix of happiness and sadness. As he walked to the docking bay, the crew followed him, saying their goodbyes. Jai-Ho climbed into his small ship, giving them one last wave before closing the hatch. He watched them through the viewport, their faces full of gratitude and respect. As he prepared for takeoff, Jai-Ho felt a sense of pride and peace. The crew had shown courage, and he knew they would rebuild stronger than ever. He had helped them fight for their home, and now they were free to live in peace, at least for a while. The ship's engines roared to life, and as Jai-Ho took off, he saw the crew waving, their figures growing smaller as he ascended. He would always remember this place, this crew, and the battle they had fought together. Flying through the stars, Jai-Ho let himself relax, feeling the weight of his journey lift from his shoulders. He was going home, but he knew a part of him would always carry this experience with him. Back on the station, Na-Young, Captain Jarek, and the rest of the crew watched as Jai-Ho's ship disappeared into the stars. They were safe because of him, a human from a world others called dangerous. Yet to them, Jai-Ho was not a Deathworlder. He was a friend and a hero. As they began the work of rebuilding, they knew they had a new strength within them, one that Jai-Ho had helped them discover. The Xalar might come back one day, but now they knew how to stand up and defend themselves. And somewhere out in the galaxy, Jai-Ho traveled back to Earth, carrying the knowledge that he had made a difference. He had shown the galaxy that humans were capable of bravery, intelligence, and loyalty. The crew returned to their duties, each carrying a bit of Jai-Ho's spirit. They knew that no matter how many Xalar or other dangers might come, they had the courage to face anything. The memory of their human friend would always remind them that even in the darkest moments, there was hope. And that was how they knew they would survive.